The story of America is long, complex, and still evolving. It begins not with the Declaration of Independence or the Pilgrims, but thousands of years earlier with the indigenous peoples of North America. Long before any European set foot on the continent, Native American tribes such as the Iroquois, Cherokee, Sioux, Navajo, and hundreds of others developed thriving civilizations, rich spiritual traditions, and advanced systems of governance. Some built mound cities, others were skilled farmers, traders, or hunters. They managed forests, built irrigation systems, and had deep knowledge of their environment. This was not an empty land, it was a continent filled with culture and life. In 1492, Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean opened the floodgates for European exploration. Though Columbus never reached what is now the United States, his voyages triggered centuries of colonization. The Spanish established missions and forts in the Southwest. The French explored the Mississippi River and Great Lakes. And the English founded colonies along the Atlantic coast. By the early 1600s, Jamestown and Plymouth became the first successful British settlements in what would become the United States. Over the next century, 13 British colonies took root along the eastern seaboard. These colonies had distinct economies, religions, and cultures. The North focused on industry and trade, the South on plantations and slavery, and the middle colonies became hubs of commerce and tolerance. But tensions with Britain slowly grew. As the British government imposed taxes like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, without colonial representation, resentment brewed. The famous slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a rallying cry. By the 1770s, anger turned into action. Protests, boycotts, and eventually violence broke out. The Boston Tea Party in 1773 was a defiant act of rebellion. In 1775, the first shots of the American Revolutionary War were fired at Lexington and Concord. 1 year later, the colonies declared independence. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence, authored by Thomas Jefferson, proclaimed that all men are created equal and that government derives power from the consent of the governed. The war for independence was long and difficult. The British had a superior military, but the Americans had determination and key allies like France. After 8 years of conflict, the Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized the United States as an independent nation. But freedom was only the beginning. The new country faced the daunting task of building a government. The Articles of Confederation proved too weak, so in 1787, the Constitution was drafted in Philadelphia. It created a federal system with checks and balances and established 3 branches of government. In 1789, George Washington became the first president. During the 1800s, America expanded rapidly. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 doubled the size of the country. The Lewis and Clark expedition mapped vast new lands. Manifest Destiny, the belief that the U.S. was destined to span from coast to coast, drove settlers westward. But this expansion came at a terrible cost. Native American lands were seized, treaties were broken, and entire communities were forced to move, often violently, as seen in the Trail of Tears. Meanwhile, the issue of slavery loomed large. The Southern economy relied on enslaved labor, while the North began to industrialize and oppose the practice. Tensions escalated over new states joining the Union. Would they allow slavery or not? The Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the Dred Scott decision only deepened the divide. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. His opposition to the expansion of slavery led 11 Southern states to secede from the Union, forming the Confederacy. In 1861, the Civil War began, the bloodiest conflict in American history. More than 600,000 people died. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in Confederate territory free. In 1865, the Union won. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. Lincoln was assassinated shortly after. The Reconstruction era attempted to rebuild the South and ensure rights for freed slaves. African Americans briefly gained political power, but white supremacist violence and discriminatory laws, known as Jim Crow, reversed much of that progress for the next century. In the late 1800s, the U.S. entered the Gilded Age, an era of industrial growth, technological innovation, and immense inequality. Railroads stretched coast to coast. Factories boomed. Immigrants poured in from Europe, changing the demographic fabric. But labor was brutal. Workers fought for rights through strikes and unions. In 1898, the U.S. flexed its growing military power during the Spanish-American War, acquiring overseas territories like Puerto Rico and the Philippines. The 20th century began with more change. Progressive reforms addressed child labor, women's suffrage, and corruption. In 1917, America joined World War I. The war ended in 1918, and the U.S. emerged as a global player. The 1920s brought jazz, Hollywood, and booming stock markets, but also prohibition and deep inequality. Then came the Great Depression in 1929. Banks collapsed. Millions lost jobs. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal created Social Security, public works programs, and financial reforms that reshaped the American government. In 1941, the U.S. entered World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The war mobilized the entire country. Factories produced weapons, women joined the workforce, and millions served abroad. By 1945, the Allies had won. But America had changed, it was now a superpower. The Cold War began soon after, with the U.S. and Soviet Union locked in ideological and nuclear competition. At home, the 1950s brought prosperity, suburban growth, and the rise of television. But the peace was unequal. African Americans still faced segregation and disenfranchisement. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement exploded. Led by Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and others, it pushed for justice through marches, boycotts, and civil disobedience. Landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 followed. The country also changed socially and culturally. Feminism, environmentalism, and anti-war protests reshaped public discourse. The Vietnam War divided the nation. In 1969, the U.S. landed astronauts on the moon, an iconic Cold War victory. The 1970s brought economic struggles and political scandal. The Watergate scandal led to President Nixon's resignation. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan championed conservatism, tax cuts, and a strong military. The Cold War ended in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. In the 1990s, the Internet revolution began. The U.S. led in tech innovation. Bill Clinton's presidency oversaw economic growth but was rocked by scandal. American culture spread globally through music, movies, and technology. The 21st century began with trauma. On September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks killed nearly 3,000 people. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan and later Iraq, beginning the longest wars in American history. Barack Obama's election in 2008 was historic. He inherited a major financial crisis and passed healthcare reform. But political divisions deepened. In 2016, Donald Trump's presidency saw sharp polarization, immigration crackdowns, and controversial policies. Social movements like Black Lives Matter rose in response to racial injustice. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic changed everything. Lockdowns, economic collapse, and over 1 million deaths reshaped American life. Joe Biden took office in 2021, pledging unity, but the country remained divided on issues like vaccines, climate change, and election integrity. Today, America is at a crossroads. Technology, diversity, and global power define its potential. But inequality, partisanship, and environmental threats remain serious challenges. Yet the American story has always been one of reinvention. It is a nation founded on ideals, freedom, democracy, equality that it has never fully achieved, but constantly pursued. From indigenous nations to immigrant waves, from slavery to civil rights, from isolationism to global leadership, the U.S. has transformed again and again. The next chapter of American history is unwritten, and it belongs to everyone who lives it.